And of course, when we talk about parenting, there's lots of ways that can happen. But for us, I love something else Pastor Joe said, and Randy, you referred to it, is he said, I'd rather have 1,000 churches of 50 people than 50 churches of 1,000. And I so totally agree with that statement. For Foursquare, our medium church size, the mean church size, is 56. And so if you kind of think about that nationally in the United States, that half of our churches are below that number, half of the churches are above that number, but that's the church size. And one of the biggest challenges I have as a leader of a church planting movement is to try to communicate to pastors of that size church that they can have a vibrant participation in reaching the lost, discipling leaders, and multiplying churches. And one of the frustrations of my life is to work with a church of 1,000 people who say that they will be involved in church planting at some point, but usually the place that they see themselves planting churches is 200 or 300 people more than they are today. So if they're 1,000, then when we're about 1,200 or 1,300, we are going to be so on this thing. And I look at the size of their building, and I think if you add 300 people to this building, I know what you're going to be thinking. You're going to be thinking a new building. And the whole idea of planting a church is going to go out the window. And I love the idea that maybe the church can be multiplied in ways that expand our thinking more than just getting bigger buildings. And this will become a challenge for you as a movement as you see more and more churches grow and they begin to stretch the ability to seat everyone. I think a vibrant solution is to think about church planting. There's a book, I have a dozen copies of these. A guy in our movement, he really presides over a movement within our movement called the Hope Chapel Movement. And his name is Ralph Moore. And anyway, he wrote a book. I brought a dozen copies with me, and I'll give them to Randy, and he can hand them out to wherever he would like to see them go. But in essence, what it's talking about is health and discipleship. It's not just a matter of giving birth and multiplying churches for church's sake, but it's about really a generative life cycle of making disciples and being not just a congregation that prepares people but sends people. And I have a relationship with a church in California. When I was just a kid, we were part of planting the church, and recently they had their 40-year anniversary, and they invited me to come speak. And anyway, our family was one of 5 families that pioneered that church. And so this 40-year anniversary was really great. And I was meeting with the leadership beforehand, and they asked me how well that I felt that they did in preparing me to go. And anyway, and I said, I think you did a great job. I remember what I learned as a kid, and I remember what I was able to do. In fact, I grew up, I became the youth pastor there, was youth pastor 9 years. But then they asked me a different question, which I guess I wasn't ready for, and it was, how well did we prepare, or how well did we send you? How well did we prepare you, then how well did we send you? And I said, well, are you ready for this answer? Because you didn't send us at all. We had to go. And it was interesting because we had a conversation around that particular question, the difference between going and sending. And I want to suggest that one of the things that is really a big win for any congregation is to understand the difference between people who are prepared for ministry and go, and people who are prepared for ministry and are sent. Because when we went, what we left behind was a group of people that felt betrayed and abandoned. And we felt like betrayers and abandoners. I mean, we literally probably ended up leaving 2 years after we should have been sent, to be honest with you. And anyway, and all I did was just tell them, listen, that happened, it's reality, but can we do 2 things today? Can we celebrate that we went? Can you celebrate that God sent us? And secondly, can you dedicate yourselves as a church and leadership to not doing it that way again? To being great at preparing people, but being really good at sending them. And part of the task, I think, of a pastor is to recognize the call in somebody's life to go, and then to align themselves with what Jesus is doing and send those leaders, to send them. I want to talk about the birthplace of churches, and I believe that the birthplace of churches is is found in Matthew chapter 9. And let me just read out of the NIV in verse 35 through 38. It says here that Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues and villages, teaching and preaching the good news of the kingdom and healing every disease and sickness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. And then he said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field." See, I think there's an incredible, power-packed message in those verses. That Jesus goes before us. He's there where people are at. Their pain touches his heart, and he responds to their pain. And his response is to turn to us, the people he's entrusting the church to. And he says, look at their pain, be moved by that. That word compassion is really a powerful word. It's not just like I feel badly about their situation. It's that literally his innards or his guts twisted within him when he saw that pain. And I love his response is that even though he was ministering to their hurts and their needs, he knew he was not going to be there for much longer. That he was going to go back to the Father, and yet there had to be some enduring response to the pain in people's lives. And you and I both know that it came in the form of the church. That's what we steward today. And at that moment, what Jesus did is he turned to the disciples and he said, do you see that pain? He said, what's missing is workers into the harvest field. Now he didn't send them. The very first word wasn't go. Now in chapter 10, he does send them. But right then what he said was pray to the Lord of the harvest to send workers into the harvest field. And I believe that prayer, because Jesus is in the cities and towns of the United States right now where people live, and he sees their pain and is moved by them, that if you and I will pray for workers, the answer to where church planters are going to come from, and everybody asks that question as God begins to stir your heart towards being a church planting movement, it is found in this verse. Go to your knees and just ask the Lord of the harvest. But can I also tell you something? Is that prayer can be something that is birthed out of passion and not duty. One of the most powerful illustrations I've ever heard was last night as Pastor Joe was talking about the marriage counseling where he referenced maybe you should buy your wife flowers, and the guy did out of duty and his wife thanked Pastor Joe for the flowers. That was like, ouch. That was a big deal. When we pray for the Lord of the harvest to send workers in the harvest field, there's something that ignites our prayers when we personally have been with lost people and seen their pain and been touched by that pain in the same way that Jesus is. And that instead of just simply responding to that, we hit our knees and we pray and then we respond. I think that's really a big deal. But it's that personal encounter. You know, I come from a broken family. I'm number 6 of 11. So I'm a middle child, but there's 5 years between me and my next older brother, and my mom used to refer to me as being the oldest of the second litter of kids. And so, anyway, I was growing up. I was insufferable to my younger siblings because my parents really had decided to stop having children with my next oldest brother. But then, sometimes accidentally a child is conceived, which is, I think, what happened with me. And but I tell my younger siblings that even though they decided to quit, the experience with me was so pleasant that they decided to keep on going, and that my younger siblings owe their existence to that wonderful experience they gave my parents. My dad walked away from us kids when there were 8 of us, my mom and 8 kids, and left a single mom with that task. And anyway, she spun. It was a very difficult season and spent a year in a mental hospital with a nervous breakdown. Our church, in a very strange way, embraced my dad, even though it was his secretary he ran off with.